Making Sense of Faith podcast. My name is Adam Hamilton. I'm the senior pastor at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City, author of a few books, and host of this podcast. And I'm really excited to welcome on our, welcome on our podcast today, Tommy Spaulding. He's an amazing guy. And I just want to tell you a little bit about him. So many of you will already know and be familiar with him, but he's the author of three amazing books. 2010, It's Not Just Who You Know, Transform Your Life and Your Organization by Turning Colleagues and Contacts into Lasting, Genuine Relationships. 2015, The Heart-Led Leader, How Living and Leading from the Heart will change your organization, your life. And in 2022, The Gift of Influence, creating life-changing and lasting impact in your everyday interactions. And he spent most of his life in leadership development, worked for IBM before he really began to focus on this calling to help raise up leaders. He was CEO of Up With People. Many of you are familiar with that. Some of you have been a part of that organization in the past. 25 years ago, he founded Leaders Challenge, which grew to become the largest high school civic and leadership program in the state of Colorado. He's the founder and president of the Global Youth Leadership Academy, as well as the National Leadership Academy, a leading national nonprofit high school leadership development organization. He's spoken around the world. People turn to him and have been inspired and moved by his teachings on leadership. And today we're going to talk a little bit about leadership and a little bit about forgiveness. And Tommy, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, Pastor Adam, it's my honor.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself. Just where'd you grow up? What's your family like? Let's find out about you personally before we jump into the other.
You bet, you bet. Well, I grew up in upstate New York, and my grandparents were hairdressers. They immigrated from Italy.
Wow.
Every Sunday after Mass, I'd go get a haircut, whether I needed one or not. Had a great Italian feel, but they really modeled, servant leadership for me. My parents were both school teachers, public school teachers, and I have an older sister, younger sister, and they want to have a big family. I'm Catholic, and so all Catholics have big families, and they had a couple of miscarriages. And they couldn't have any more children, and I think a couple of them were actually stillborns, and it just devastated my parents. And so they decided to adopt a girl from Korea, and that was like life changing. Being 7 years old and going to the airport and picking up your new baby sister, and that
Wow.
was a beautiful thing having a sister that looked different than me, and that just began my life of wanting to travel the world and grow and learn.
So how did you from IBM, how did you decide that you wanted to focus on leadership development? I mean, that was by itself a shift from I think were you at IBM right before you went to Up With People?
Yeah, actually, I went to other people many different times in my career.
Okay.
But after I graduated business school, I did my MBA in Australia. I
Mm.
wanted some, business experience. And uh, I worked for IBM, and it only takes a year to work for IBM, realizing you don't want to sell software for the rest of your life. And that's when I went back to Up With People and,
Okay.
became CEO and ran that organization. But I met a guy named Ken Blanchard, who
Mhm.
is an incredible, author and just an incredible thought leader. And we hired him at an Up With People event, and I got to know his heart, and he really inspired me to kind of get into this business.
That's awesome. That's really great. So your focus in leadership has reminded me of an old leadership classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Did you read that book ever? Is there any connection between
Yeah, there
the
is.
way you approach leadership?
Oh my God, I can't believe you asked that question. I love that, Adam. I'm dyslexic, and I really struggled academically when I was a kid. Like back then in the 80s, they didn't know what to do with kids like me. So I was in the resource room with kids with autism and dyslexia, and on the spectrum, and the resource room, was where I hung out. And my father was a school teacher. He was an English school teacher, and Noah's only son, really had a hard time reading. So when I was in eighth grade, he came to my bedroom, and my dad was a very humble, quiet, gentle man. And he brings the book, Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I'm failing out of school. I'm struggling academically. I'm going in summer school. I'm just really having a hard time in school. And your self-worth is kind of gets challenged when you're getting D's and F's. And he says, Tommy, you're not very academically gifted and you're challenged there. But I've seen you since a young boy, how you love people, just how you love, the relationships, and you're such a beautiful soul. And I think if you can harness this power of relationships, it's going to change your life. And this book that Dale Carnegie really talks about, how do you, use relationships as your strength. And he read that book to me, and we read that together.
Wow, that's
Um,
awesome.
that was the book that kind of put me on my way. And my first book, It's Not Just So You Know, kind of takes that Dale Carnegie sense and, how do you build meaningful, authentic, genuine, heartfelt relationships? Like, how do you build relationships with love? How do you build relationships? Like, we all want something for everybody. Like at the end of the day, I want something from you, so I want to build a relationship with you. So I can. It's a give and take thing. It's a very transactional thing, and it just saddens me that many of us in the world live that way.
Right.
So my first book was really about how do you take that equation out of your life? How do you live a life where you build meaningful servant relationships, where you want to serve and love others and be vulnerable and real and caring, and you don't want anything from people. You just want to give to people.
Right.
I mean, when you live a life that way, as you're blessed.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's interesting. So, your faith background, you're Catholic by background, you're a practicing Catholic. You also go with your wife and kids to a Protestant non-denominational church, I think.
Right.
So you double dip on Sundays.
I
But
double dip.
yeah, but this idea of servant leadership, of course, starts way before Greenleaf ever talked about this. It goes back to Jesus, right? I mean, he's well, probably even before him, but certainly, we could go to Moses or others, but certainly in Jesus, this picture of what love looks like, and the cross is an example of that. Greater love has no one than they lay down their life for their friends, or this is my commandment, that you love one another, and that love being agape. And so in essence, you're suggesting really that leadership is in part living that out towards other people. Am I hearing you correctly? And how much
You
has
are.
Jesus influenced you and what you're
You
thinking?
are. Christians, we love Jesus. That's our Savior, and we're taught that He's the Lord and Savior, right? He's our Father, and we look to Him as our spiritual mentor, as Christians, as Catholics, as Methodists, or whatever. And what Ken Blanchard, my mentor, author of the One Minute Manager, taught me uh, is that we need to look at Jesus as our leadership model as well. And people don't really do that. They think of Jesus as church, as their father, as a godly figure, but he's our leadership role model, and he was, begging us um, to serve others and put others before yourself. Get down on your knees and wash the feet of your disciples, wash the
Exactly.
feet of your customers, your employees, your people. Um, and
That's
I
such a
think we need
powerful
to,
picture, right?
yeah,
Such
it
a
is.
powerful picture of the foot washing, as us, I've set this example, as I've done for you, you must do for others.
Yeah, yeah,
So, okay, tell me, one of the leadership principles when I'm teaching pastors on leadership, one of the top 5 leadership principles is it's all about people. That in the end, if you don't realize whatever you're doing, doesn't matter what you're doing, it's about people. It's about caring for people. It's about being concerned for their needs. And that's what I hear you as you're talking about this. Help me understand, or maybe just share, if you were talking to somebody, the elevator speech on, if I could only teach you 2 or 3 things about leadership, this is what I'd teach you. What would those things be for you?
yeah. Well, I would say to them, I'm not a really tattoo fan. I don't have any tattoos. I'm kind of scared of needles, but I appreciate them because when people have tattoos in their body, it means something, you know. And if I was going to get a tattoo, I'd put it on my arm or my chest and it would say 4 words. And that's the 4 words of leadership. And it's not about you. 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 I mean, if I could just drill that in every leader's head. And I believe there's 2 types of leaders in the world. You're either going to be a servant leader, what I call a heart-led leader, leaders that truly put others before themselves. Meaning, I put my wife first, my kids first, my husband first, my partner first, right? My employees, my customers, my friends. I put others before myself. Or you're a self-serving leader, meaning I put myself first, and after I fill my cup, then after I take care of myself, I serve myself first, then I serve others. And the research that I've done with the Heart-Led Leader, which was really my middle book that really kind of took me to on a global scale, about 90% of the world's leaders, the billions of people on the planet, 90% of us are self-serving leaders. So it's really, really hard, Pastor Adam. It's so hard to become a heart-led leader. So like 10% of the world's leaders are truly, servant leaders where they get up every morning and lead like Jesus. They wash the feet of their people. And so I've just dedicated my life to try to flip that. I would love to have 90% of the world really servant leaders. We'd have different education, we'd have different politics, we'd have different business, we'd have different nonprofit
Yes.
ministries. If
Yeah.
people came from a place where it's not about me, it's about serving others. And it's that switch
Yeah.
that we have to take.
Yeah. And Jesus talks about this, it's those who lose their lives will find it, right? I mean, we find we find what we were made for. We find the greatest joy in life, meaning in life, fulfillment in life when we flip the orientation from self to the other. I mean, it works both ways in the end. You don't do it for that reason, but what you find is what you were looking for all along when you do that. That's awesome. So, your latest book, tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, The Gift of Influence is my baby. I have three children. I have three books. It's, you got to love them all. But my last book, The Gift of Influence, is my favorite. That's the one that really moved my heart. And it started when I heard this saying, like just kind of research that was, I think it was Stanford that did it years ago, that the average human being influences 2.8 people a day. So they kind of studied sociology and people who are movements, the barista at Starbucks, the Uber driver, the person at church that you sit next to, the new employee, the new neighbor. But human beings as a whole, we meet 2.8 new people a day in our whole life. And when I first heard that, you're an author, pastor. Like sometimes you hear things and it kind of hits your heart. And that hit me, 2.8 people a day. So I did the math, 2.8 people a day times 365 days times 77 years, which is like the average life expectancy in the world. America's a little higher, but 77. But if you take 2.8 people a day times 365 days a year times 77 years, you get exactly 80,000.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? 80,000
That's just,
people.
that just blew my mind that we get to
Yeah.
influence, meet,
Yep.
have an effect on 80,000 people in our life, average. And so I started thinking about, where would they fit? You know, they'd fit in a stadium, and so how cool that would be when we die and we go go home to Jesus. And right before we die, we go to our famous football stadium. Mine's the Broncos stadium. Yours probably the Kansas City's Chiefs stadium, but
Oh, yeah.
we go to our stadium and all 80,000 people, all 2.8 people in our lives, they're all there in the stadium to say goodbye. And we walk on the 50-yard line right before we die and we say goodbye to all 80,000 people. Every single person we met and influenced in our life. And the question I pose in the book and a question I'll pose on your podcast this morning is, what's the sound of your stadium?
Mm.
Are they just giving stand ovation and singing, woo? Like, are they this, like, you changed my life. You invested in me. You were nice to me. You were kind to me. You spoke to me. You loved me. Or are they booing you because you've been thinking about yourself a lot your whole life and not putting others first? Or even worse, is the stadium silent because we've been looking at, oh, there's my screensaver, Jesus walking out too.
Yeah.
But you know, we've been looking at our phones our whole life, never looking in front of who's in front of us. And so the stadium's silent because we've
Yeah.
been looking down the whole life. And I really kind of wrote a book about how to build a life where your stadium is filled with 80,000 people that are thanking you for having a positive influence on the lives of others. And that's really the essence of the book.
That's awesome. So, would you capture maybe one or two of those things that are here's a couple of the many things in my book about living a life that leads to having a positive impact on those as many of those 80,000 as possible. What would one or two of those many
Yeah.
things that you share in your book be?
Um, I talk a lot about running towards pain. For me, we do so good with birthday cards and Christmas cards and hanging out there and Thanksgiving and the fun stuff. My son is graduating West Point Military Academy next week. I told you, I'm getting all these calls and emails like, man, your son's graduate West Point. That's great. My younger son just got drafted to the USHL hockey. That's great. He got drafted, or happy anniversary, 25 years or 50 years, or you IPO'd your company, you sold your company, your kid just graduated, great school. Like, we run towards good, like fun things and celebrations. Um, but we have a hard time running towards pain when your friend's going through a nasty divorce, when your friend's got a son that's hooked on drugs or depressed and suicidal, um, when you're battling with porn, when you're going bankrupt your company, like or you lost a son to a car accident. Like, we feel bad when our friends and families and our customers, clients have hard things happen to them, but we actually don't follow up. And I told this whole story about a dear friend of mine that lost his son with teenage suicide. He was bullied. His name is Teddy, and he was a big banker in town, a beautiful man, Scott Wetzel. I wrote the story in my book with his permission. And when his son died and actually killed himself, jumped off a bridge, because of bullying. He was a high school kid. I knew him. Um, my buddy said, people felt bad. I got some cards. My family definitely felt bad, but not a lot of people really followed up because what do you say to the guy that lost the son that jumped off a bridge? Like you don't know what to do. But Tommy, you showed up. You mailed me rosaries. You mailed me books. You called me. You texted me. Dropped off. Like you just showed up, and I really want to challenge people. If you want to fill your stadium with 80,000 people, stop sending Christmas cards and birthday cards and saying happy anniversary and congratulations to people. Show up to people when they have the hardship, right? I've been through depression. I've been through anxiety. My son's been through depression. My daughter's got anxiety. We've had hardships in our life. And the
Right.
friends that showed up with me,
Yep.
during those times,
Yep.
those are the ones that I'm going to be in their stadium,
Yep.
not the ones that send me a Christmas card and wish me happy birthday.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. We talk about here at Resurrection two things. One is pay attention. If you pay attention every day, God's going to bring people across your path, or you're just going to stumble across their path. But opportunities every single day. Well, you mentioned the 2.8. I think sometimes it's more than that in a given day. Sometimes less than that. But paying attention to what's going on, look in people's eyes, see what's going on in their eyes. And then showing up. Your comment here.
Yeah,
Pay attention and show up. You
yeah,
show up, you're going to find that you're in the middle of what God is doing. God uses people. He puts flesh and bone on His love,
yeah,
but you gotta, He needs people who are going to say, "Here I am. Send me. Help me to pay attention to who needs a word of encouragement or care." And every one of those things you just described your friend. You know, you had a million other things you could have been doing that day, and you showed up at his house.
yeah,
And you had other things you could have been doing the day you sent him things or you were praying for him, but you made a point. Like this is part of what life is about, is showing up. And this is when you look at Jesus, he was interrupted all the time and he was always giving into the interruptions, right? Which is kind of John Lennon's, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
yeah. I
Jesus is
love that.
always being stopped. And he stops, with a woman who reaches out and grabs the hem of his garment. He stops, who touched me? And he ministers to her and, whoever's in need at that moment. And I love that. Well, Tommy, let's talk about forgiveness. When you think about leadership, so you've taught leadership for decades now, and often in leadership books, you don't read much about forgiveness. You don't, I don't, I think about high school and all the things our high school teachers taught us, math and, science and geography, but there weren't very many lessons on forgiveness. And yet it strikes me that forgiveness is a really important key to success in life. Tell me what your thoughts are on forgiveness.
The reason why
Right.
people don't write about it is because it's so hard.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it's so hard. And I mean, I just want to be totally transparent to pastors. You can't lie to a pastor is because I struggle with forgiveness. You know, I might be a global leadership expert and good at that side of the business of teaching leadership, but forgiveness is so hard.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned that 2/3 of the world struggle with forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, more than that, even
I
I think
actually
if
fight
everybody's
this all
honest,
the
it's,
time.
yeah,
So
nearly universal. Yeah.
yeah. But I listened to one of your podcasts the other day when one of your sermons, and you know you if you can't learn how to forgive, which is one of the hardest things we do as humans, you're not going to have a happy, successful life. And it's interesting. I've had this happy, successful life, but the one thing, Pastor, the one thing, my kryptonite is I gotta forgive my mother. I gotta forgive that man that molested me when I was 14. I gotta forgive my dad who drank a lot growing up. I gotta forgive my wife's ex-husband who was awful to me. I gotta forgive my ex-business partner who was awful to our clients. Like I I gotta forgive my lawnmower guy that cut the grass too short, and burned my whole grass. Like
Mhm.
it's just every day God puts these things that we're constantly challenged to forgive. And I
Yes.
just believe that when we meet our maker, when we meet Jesus, he's gonna be like, okay, great. You sold a lot of books, you did a lot of good, you changed a lot of lives, you volunteered, you went down to Haiti, you did some good stuff. But man, Tommy, that forgiveness thing, man, that muscle, you didn't really stretch that very well.
Hmm.
And I've done this audit. I have like 35 people I need to forgive. I got like,
Yeah.
oh, I know a lot of people since like my Mrs. DeZinni, my ninth grade typing teacher said that I was stupid and I would never go to college.
Mm.
And I gotta forgive her. And she's passed away. Mr. Tilton, my guidance counselor, looked at my grades, my GPA, my SAT, and said, college isn't for you. You should go to trade school. Like, we just, I just think we all need to do a forgiveness audit. We need to write down every person that we need to forgive.
Yes.
And wouldn't it be beautiful if we all did that
Yeah.
and we all took the leap of forgiving others?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. The idea I've taught in the congregation, the Greek word for forgive is to release or to let go. And we
Mm,
either cling to things, we either cling to them, we hold on to them, or we release them and we let them go.
love
And
that, Pastor.
yeah, and forgiveness is not, as
Yeah.
you know, it's not saying what the other person did is okay. It's not saying it didn't matter, it didn't hurt. It's not saying you're going to forget. It's saying I'm going to choose to let go of this thing that I've been holding on to, this resentment, this bitterness. I want to choose to let go of that, and I'm going to let go of the right to hold it against you. I'm not going to, and even when somebody's dead, we can still hold that in our hearts. And you're clearly, and everybody has in different ways. You've articulated some very serious places where you had pain and learning, either we hold on to that and really we're the ones who are harmed by that, right? We hold on to it and I use the metaphor of a backpack filled with rocks, as our heart, and every one of those rocks have different sizes, pebbles to giant boulders, and we carry those around with us, or we finally figure out, I got to let that go. And I think it's why Jesus talked about forgiveness so much. It's just, it was a regular part, the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. I mean, he's trying to say, this is really important for you, for you, for me, for everybody. Yeah, we did a survey of our congregation just yesterday and found that 66% of our people said that they struggle with forgiveness, and 34% were lying. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
But, some people find it easier to be able to let go, but for a lot of folks, it's a real issue
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
how do we do
And
that?
with people with forgiveness, I'm sensing because I'm one of these people, is like my daughter has been praying for me. She loves Jesus. She says, Daddy, listen to this video, this guy ran over his son and killed his son. And then he went in prison and they gave him, and then when he got out of prison, he adopted him and loved him as a family, and that's his new son. Like, there's all these amazing stories. I wrote a couple of stories in some of my books about the power of forgiveness and people, doing unbelievable forgiveness. Drunk driver killing someone and forgiving that person. The Pope, when it was Pope John Paul, when he was shot in the 80s, he went to prison and forgave them. Like, you hear all these stories of great forgiveness. Everyone says, but you don't know my story. You
Mhm.
don't know my mother. You don't know what she put like everyone says they could do it, but I can't. And the reality is, yes, we all can.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
that's
we all
exactly
can.
right, Tommy. That's exactly right.
Yes, we all can. Yeah.
I want to ask you a couple last questions, and then I'm going to let you go. I wanted to find out how do you relate ROR, return on relationships, uh, to forgiveness for leaders? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a well, I've never had that question before. I love that. Well, ROR is something I came up with in my first book. It means return on relationships. And the whole premise was that um, most of us focus on ROI. You know, what's the return on the investment? It's transactional. Like, what do I get out of it? And I just challenge the world to not think about the ROI, but think about the ROR. Build the relationships, and the return on the relationships will grow the ROI and grow things. But I've never had someone ask me what's that with forgiveness, but I feel it. I know the answer, and
Yeah.
I don't practice the answer yet because I'm learning. But if you want to build authentic, genuine, heartfelt, lifelong relationships, that's just been such a my mantra. My first book was all about that. Like, how do you build a life where the people that are around you, the people you surround yourself, are authentic, genuine, heartfelt, you have vulnerability real? Like, how do you build these types of relationships? You really can't unless you forgive because every one of those people will hurt you at some point.
Yes.
My wife always says Jesus is the only person who will never hurt you. Never, he'll never let you down. But I will. My wife will.
Yep.
Your children will, and your
Yep.
friends, your employees, and everyone who you love. Like, if you're building these authentic relationships, every one of those relationships will hurt you at some point because we're human. And so if you don't know how to forgive, at the end of the day, your analogy with the rocks in the backpack, you're gonna have one heck of a backpack, a lot of rocks in there. So forgiveness is the key to preserving these authentic relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm thinking you've been married for how long?
20, I'm going to my 21st year.
All right, good.
Yeah.
That's great. So for me, it's 43 years. So we got married the week after high school graduation. We were 17 and 18.
Wow.
But
I
I
love
think about, that when it comes to marriage, for you and your wife, I'm guessing you have to have squabbles from time to time. You have to have times where you've disappointed her, she's disappointed you. How do you practice forgiveness there? What does
Yeah.
that look like for you personally?
Yeah. You know how like you can remember when you're a kid, like I don't know, like the first memory, but one of the first memories I have as a kid is I remember it was my parents' anniversary. I was like really young and I didn't have any much money. I maybe saved some from, you know, holiday gifts or something. And I went to a little store, like back then they had Hallmark stores, and there was little bars of soap. And I want to get my parents a present. And there was little bars of soap, and there's a husband on his knees washing his wife's toes. Love is washing, each other's toes. And I remember, just seeing that. And yeah, ironically, that is what Jesus did. He actually washed
Mhm.
our toes, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I think the key to marriage is to love unconditionally and to know that you're gonna let your spouse down. Um, but knowing that divorce is never an option, and that you're always there to stick it through the thick and thin. And the love is really unconditional. That's kind of the power of that is
yeah,
is getting down on your feet and washing the toes,
yep, yep,
spouse.
yep. I love how Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 13, love keeps no record of wrongs. And I
Oh,
find I find we're just such great
another one. Say that again, Pastor.
love keeps no record of wrongs. And I find that we're so good at accounting when it comes to marriages. Well, you did this to me then, and you did this to me then, and then, you didn't do this for me. And as opposed to choosing, we make a decision. I'm not going to keep a record of wrongs.
Yeah,
I want to ask you one last question. And this has to do with the world that we're living in today, which is hyper polarized. The survey that we did, 66% of people said that they had, I think it was 66% said, or 64% said that they had, been in conflict or felt anger or deep disappointment with somebody over politics, and or somebody had felt that with them.
yeah.
And so we find ourselves divided when it comes to politics, and not just divided, but it's one thing to disagree, like, hey, we disagree with each other on this thing. It's another thing to say, I really don't like you because we disagree on this thing. So I'm thinking about leadership and you know the world that we're living in and forgiveness. What do you see any connections between, or maybe I just say, how do you address the issues of polarization when it comes to teaching people about relationships, about being that kind of relational leader? What's the key there? What do you offer when it comes to this?
Well, we have the most polarized world we've ever been in. But I've lost so many friends that said, I can't, even though I'm not public with my political beliefs,
Right.
my close friends know it,
Yeah.
and know who I voted for. And I've had many people say, I can't be your friend. I can't have you over for holidays. I can't,
Mm.
be a part of your life because of your beliefs. And that's sad. That's why we need Jesus more than ever, because what Jesus teaches us and tells us, and quite frankly, Pastor, he demands from us, is that we love and serve all people. And, I want to challenge Christians right now, because some of us, we have these problems is that, we love Christians, but we're called to love Jews, and we're called to love Muslims, and we're called to
Right.
love gay people, and we're called to love, Buddhist people, people. We might not agree with these things, but we're called to love and serve all people. And your tech support guy, Matt, I just love this kid. Before he jumped on the webinar, he
Yeah.
said,
Matt
I love
Williams, our producer. Yeah.
yeah, William, your producer, yeah, Matt, your producer. He said, I love what you do with kids, high school kids. And yes, I write books. Yes, I do all this leadership stuff, but I really love working with high school kids. And if you could teach a high school kid that that the rest of their life they're called to love and serve other people. Do you have friends that are Muslim? Do you have friends that are Jewish? Do you have friends that are atheists? Do you have friends that are rich? Do you have friends that are poor? Do you have friends that are black, that are Asian, Mexican? Do you have friends that look different than you and believe different than you? Because we're called to love these people. And I believe, and I'm not a pastor, but this is my philosophy. The best way to bring people to Jesus isn't to talk about Jesus, it's to model Jesus. And like, what's that phase like, Spread the gospel of the word of these Jesus and use words when necessary. Whoever said that's a genius. I love that.
Yeah.
Like you bring people to Jesus because you're just such a beacon of love and forgiveness and care and relationship to all people. That's how you bring people to Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's usually attributed to St. Francis, though I'm not sure he actually said it, but preach the gospel at all times and only when you have to use
Yeah,
words.
I
And that's
love
such a
that,
great,
Pastor.
that's such a
I'm like,
great phrase. You were,
that's my second tattoo, Pastor.
there you go. I love it. That's exactly right. I mean, it is interesting. And, Jesus did tell us, he said, not just to love your neighbors, and your neighbors, anybody who's in need. It's the good Samaritan seeing the Jewish man on the side of the road left for dead. But he also said to love your enemies. And then for us to remember that, my political opponent is not my enemy. They're a fellow human being with me. They might even be a fellow Christian. They might be a fellow graduate of the same school I went to, or a fellow person in my city. They're not really my enemy, but even if I consider them my enemy, Jesus calls me to love them, which
Yeah.
doesn't have to do with feelings or emotions. It has to do with wishing the best for them. It's seeking to bless them. It's agape, which is selfless and sacrificial blessing for another person, acts of kindness. Tommy, I appreciate your vulnerability and your transparency in saying, look, I don't have this whole thing figured out. Thank you.
Thanks, Pastor.
Thanks for being with me today on the podcast. And all of you, thank you for joining me. Join us again next week for the Making Sense of Faith podcast. Until then, have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to Making Sense of Faith with Adam Hamilton. Do you know someone wrestling with life's biggest questions? Share this episode with them, because the more people willing to embrace the hard questions, the better. Do you want to go deeper? You can visit makingsenseoffaith.com to find the show notes and additional resources. That's also where you can sign up to get the notes and resources delivered straight to your inbox. If you enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe and leave us a rating in your podcast player. That'll make sure that you get the latest episodes and help others find the podcast. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that notification bell to catch future episodes and videos there. Until next time, remember that your questions matter. Doubts are normal, and making sense of faith is a lifelong journey. We'll see you on the next episode of Making Sense of Faith.